Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the downright eerie. I'm Drew, and today we're looking at a case that's baffled investigators for over a century. This episode does include some violence that involves children, so listener discretion is advised. On April 4th, 1922, Lawrence Schlittenbauer got dressed, hopped on his horse, and headed to see his ex-fiancée, Victoria Gabriel. As he approached, he could see smoke coming from the chimney. He hopped down off of his horse and knocked on the door. When no one answered, he let himself in to find the maid, Maria Baumgartner, along with 2-year-old Joseph Gabriel, lying dead in a dried pool of their own blood. The cattle were fed, the fire was lit, smoke curled into the cold Bavarian sky, and inside the farmhouse, just beyond the warmth of that flickering hearth, the rest of the family lay slaughtered. Today, we unravel the enigma of the Hinterkaifeck murders. We explore the strange happenings before the crime, the gruesome details of the attack, the chilling aftermath, and the many theories that still leave us wondering, was it a crime of passion, a cold-blooded execution, or something even more sinister? Isolated and bleak, the homestead of Hinterkaifeck sat between Ingolstadt and Schrubenhausen in rural Bavaria. It belonged to the Gruber family, a family with dark secrets. 63-year-old Andreas Gruber was the patriarch and known as a hard and unkind man. He was disliked by nearly everyone in the village. His wife, Kazila, was 72 years old and kept to herself. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, was a widow who had 2 children, 7-year-old Kazila and 2-year-old Joseph. Though Victoria's personality was a stark contrast to her father's unlikable demeanor, and the fact that she was very active in the church, her son Joseph's paternity was a stain upon the family. A rumor whispered in hushed tones. Was he the son of Victoria's late husband Karl, possibly her ex-fiancé Lorenz, or was he the product of something more disturbing, an incestuous relationship with her own father, Andreas? Though they lived in a rather secluded area, they weren't entirely alone. They often had hired hands, though no one could stand working for Andreas for very long, so turnover was pretty high. They also had a maid, at least until she fled 6 months earlier. She had claimed for months that the house was haunted. She would often hear strange noises coming from the attic that kept her awake at night. Sounds like someone walking or even whispering. At the start she would investigate, but there was never anyone to be seen. Though she told the family, they would always brush off her concerns, saying it was just the wind or her imagination. Eventually it all became too much. She wasn't sleeping, and she could no longer bear the dread that clung to the walls of that house, and she resigned her position, took her belongings, and left. But the strange sounds continued, and even escalated to the point where the family could no longer ignore them. For months there were odd sounds at night that seemed to be coming from the walls, almost like whispers but too faint to discern. Victoria was tormented with the sounds of seemingly disembodied footsteps and creaking boards at night. In late March, Andreas found footprints in the snow, leading from the dense Bavarian forest to his farmhouse, but none led away. He was a suspicious and private man, so the thought of someone on his property made him uneasy. He searched everywhere he could think on the property, but never found a trace of anyone, just the mysterious footprints. Later they noticed the key to the house came up missing. It had its own hook, and unless the family was out, they never moved it. But somehow it was gone. They searched the entire house, but it was nowhere to be found. In spite of all the strange events, Maria Baumgartner was still willing to join as their new maid. She arrived on March 31st, 1922, with her sister. She had a disability that affected her mobility, so her sister had accompanied her. They arrived early in the morning and settled in. Maria was a sweet but stern woman who immediately hit it off with 2-year-old Joseph. After her things were unloaded, Maria's sister said goodbye and headed out. This day seemed to be a truly pleasant change from the string of eerie occurrences. But then, night arrived. The killer's plan was meticulous. One by one, 4 members of the family were lured into the barn. Perhaps it was a noise among the animals, a disturbance that needed tending to. Maybe the killer called out in a familiar voice, drawing them out into the cold. Whatever the trick, it worked. Inside the barn, the killer waited in darkness, crouched in the shadows. Andreas was the first to make his way to the barn. Just as he gets a few feet in, from behind him in the shadows, the killer raises up a mattock, a heavy spiked tool, and brought it down onto Andreas' head. It's unknown if he died instantly, but regardless, he didn't survive for very long. Then, dragging his body just out of the line of sight for his next victim, he reset his trap and repeated the process 3 more times. It was Kazuya Sr., then Victoria, then 7-year-old Kazuya Jr., who clung to life much longer than the rest, ripping out clumps of her own hair before succumbing to her wounds. With 4 bodies lying in the straw, the killer covered their faces with hay and made their move to the house. Maria, the new maid who had just arrived that day, was resting in her new room when the murderer entered and issued one swift, merciless strike to the head, ending Maria's life immediately. The killer then covered her face with a bedsheet before turning their attention to the little Joseph. 2 years old, asleep in his crib, he never stood a chance. After this final act of cruelty, he covered the child's face with Victoria's dress. For days, the farm carried on as if nothing had happened. Smoke still rose from the chimney, the livestock were fed, and meals were eaten. Someone had remained inside the house, living among the deceased. 4 days later, after Kazuya had missed school and the family were absent from church, concerned neighbor and Victoria's ex-fiancé, Lawrence, followed closely by some other neighbors, arrived to check on the family. What they found would haunt them forever. By the time the police arrived at the crime scene, it had already been trampled by curious neighbors. Any forensic clues were compromised before the first officer stepped into the farm. The bodies were examined, their injuries confirming what the scene had suggested. Each victim was killed with precision, by a single weapon. Authorities interviewed over 100 people, but no single suspect stood out. The closest neighbor, Lawrence Schlittenbauer, became a prime focus, though. He was the first on the scene, leading the group that found the bodies. He handled the corpses with unsettling ease, even moving them as if he had known what to expect. Police wondered, was it the behavior of a grieving man, or the careful orchestration of a murderer? Lawrence had motive. While he was engaged to Victoria, he believed that Joseph was his son. He had even paid child support after he broke off their engagement. But somewhere along the lines, something changed. He no longer believed the boy to be his, sparking the rumors and questions of his true parentage. Former farmhands were also questioned. Had any left the farm with a grudge against Andreas? It was surely possible, as Andreas was known as a cruel man. Rumors also swirled of a soldier from the Great War, Victoria's husband Carl, who some claimed had never truly died. Others whispered about a vagrant who may have hidden in the attic for weeks, watching the family, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Whatever the case, it seems that the killer was familiar enough with the home to live there after the massacre. They had likely been on the farm for months, creeping through the attic, perhaps coming and going through the barn and into the forest. 1 year after the tragic events, the murder weapon was found in the attic that the home shared with the barn, a mattock still stained with dried blood. Despite theories, despite rumors, despite interrogations, no one was ever arrested. The case, even with its overwhelming evidence of foul play, went cold. That wraps up today's episode of Legends May Live. What do you think happened to the Gruber family? Was it a random vagrant, a former employee, spurned lover, or someone else entirely? You can reach out and let us know on social media or at legendsmaylive.com. If you liked this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend who loves a good eerie tale. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep a lookout, because it turns out legends may live.